For the past couple of years, I've been hopping around between a number of MMOs, exploring their ins and outs and making videos about my adventures for you to enjoy. Recently, I was invited to hop into a game that, if I'm being entirely honest, I completely forgot about. This is Albion Online, a sandbox MMO originally released on July 17th, 2017. My invitation came from none other than Sandbox Interactive themselves. That's right, this video is sponsored. Now, let's be clear about one thing. As far as I'm concerned, Sandbox is paying me for my time, not my opinion. So you can rest assured that this video is the one that I would have made if I had simply stumbled upon Albion Online on my own. Delving into a completely new MMO without prior knowledge has been a daunting task, but Albion Online surprised me. I've got some stories to tell about my experience so far. I got kidnapped and swept up in a bunch of guild drama, which you'll obviously be hearing about, so sit back and enjoy the video. I don't mean this as a slight, but Albion Online seems to be completely absent from the MMORPG mindshare. No one talks about it. I've never even been recommended content covering it, and I've got to admit that it never crosses my mind when I think about the biggest games in the genre. And yet, according to the brief that I was sent from Sandbox Interactive themselves, this is an MMO that enjoys over 1 million monthly active users. That was a surprise, to say the least. But you can feel the density of the game's population once you're in it. Cities are bustling, the world map is teeming with activity, and every feature in the game seems to bear the mark of player interaction. One of the more negative preconceived notions that I had about Albion Online is that it can be played on mobile. I'll confess that I tend to play more mobile games than I'd like to admit. For example, I am several hundreds of hours and dollars deep into Marvel Snap. I dabble in some Goddess of Victory Nikke on occasion. I've played some Apple Arcade games like Fantasian or Final Fantasy Plus. All this to say, I'm a bit more open to mobile gaming than most people who create content about games on YouTube, but the prospect of an MMORPG being playable on PC and mobile seemed less appealing. For a game to function on both platforms, I expected that there would have to be a heavy compromise in quality and complexity. As a result, I wasn't confident that I'd find something compelling in Albion Online. And I think it's undeniable that at a glance, this just looks like the kind of thing that's too far from the type of MMORPGs that most of us play. I am happy to report that my preconceived notions were unfounded. While the game is stripped down in some facets, which allows for the cross-platform play, the core feature set is not compromised. And the unique thing that this game offers is a complete experience. As I began exploring Albion Online, I thought that I was playing a casual MMO centered on crafting and gathering. I was wrong. This might be one of the most hardcore MMOs I've ever played. The people who play Albion Online as their committed MMO of choice are out for blood, and everything you do in the game serves that bloodlust. You know when you accidentally walk into a dangerous part of town and you start looking over your shoulder? I stumbled into some parts of Albion Online that felt like that. What I thought would be a quiet place to go fishing ended up being a battlefield with people rampantly killing each other in hunting parties. And guess what? It is riveting. That is the essence of Albion Online, which is interesting because if you frequent spaces on the internet full of MMO enthusiasts like I do, then you'll hear a great deal about how successful a full loop PvP MMO would be. The reality is that people's behavior says otherwise. It seems that what people want is to be alone together in MMOs, rather than being dependent on one another or even having to think about each other at all. For Albion to lean into the brutality of full loop PvP makes it instantly difficult to recommend. I like the idea conceptually, but I also like my equipment, and the thought of parting with it by force because I didn't have a big enough guild with me isn't my idea of fun. From what I understand about all of you out there, it isn't your idea of fun either. While gathering and crafting and dungeons and fishing are all critical components to the game's experience, if you were to ask any of the more committed players in Albion Online why they play this game, then they'd likely tell you that it's because of the thrill of the high-stakes warfare that players can engage in. This game is a sandbox in a way that simply doesn't exist very much in the MMO genre. It's unforgiving, it's time-consuming, it's a little complicated. It's doing something bold and unique in a genre that is largely settled into theme park design over sandbox freedom, and for that, it deserves some praise. Let's talk about the vibes. I'm of the opinion that vibes are a crucial component of building a long-lasting and successful MMO. But vibes are difficult to quantify. Whether or not the music, the art style, and the tone of the game create something greater than the sum of their own parts is in the eye of the beholder. The vibes in Albion Online are immaculate, I have to say. Owed mostly to its music and to a lesser extent its art style. The game's soundtrack was composed by John Valtonen, who has an extensive resume in game composition, and whose contribution to Albion Online was worth every penny. The game's main theme strikes the perfect balance between fear of the unknown and the excitement of adventure. Apologies, I have a background in music so I can talk about this kind of thing all day, but I'll leave it there. Basically, the music's great. The art style, however, might be the most contentious thing about Albion Online, particularly when it comes to first impressions. It is functional, but it isn't beautiful. Yet, I don't think that it needs to be. I'm beginning to believe that visual fidelity is a drawback in MMORPGs. Since these games have so much complexity under the hood, there have to be trade-offs in other aspects of the game, and the graphics are probably the easiest place to start. Plus, a simple and clean art style has the capacity to become timeless. For example, there is no doubt that Guild Wars 2 suffers from having leaned more towards fidelity than style, which is part of the reason why its visual presentation has suffered with the passage of time. Albion Online doesn't need to worry about quality since it has functionality and consistency. Plus, you aren't thinking about graphics when you're fighting for your life against another player or fishing out in the wilderness. One of the great challenges of the sandbox experience is that players who are idiots like me will get lost and overwhelmed before they inevitably quit the game. Thankfully, Albion Online has largely solved this problem by providing players with enough direction to prevent them from becoming overwhelmed, while offering them a warm invitation to become integrated into the early game experience. A series of simple and recognizable quests are laid out in front of you, allowing you to focus on specific facets of the game as you see fit. Soon, you find yourself out in the world, gathering materials to craft with back at the starting location, or fighting your way through a solo dungeon out in the world. Every action seems to be tied to a reward track, which is keeping tabs on your accomplishments as you play. It's somewhat reminiscent of RuneScape, but the feedback is at a lower frequency. Exploration isn't as varied or robust as I'd like it to be in Albion Online, but it's clear that the game isn't built for expecting the unexpected. There are surprises out in the world and things to stumble upon, but the predictability of progression is the focal point. One major criticism that I'd levy towards the new player experience is how early it removes the training wheels from the game, and how misrepresentative of the late game experience it is. As much as I appreciate the do-it-yourself attitude that Sandbox is pursuing, Albion Online is hardcore enough without a laissez-faire attitude during the onboarding process of the game, which I would argue is the most critical. Still, it is a solid new player experience, even if I think the game could be somewhat more generous for idiots like me. As I started recording my thoughts about Albion Online, I was initially tempted to say that the game is about doing whatever you want. I've come to discover that the more accurate synopsis is that the game is about doing whatever you can. Albion Online reminds me of a survival game more than an MMO, at least during the early hours. While veteran players insist that you should just buy your way to higher tiers of weapons and equipment, I wanted to play a video game, so I lived off of the land and built as much as I could on my own. There is an incredible satisfaction in converting raw materials into vital upgrades, then mastering your craft enough to chase after higher quality materials in more dangerous parts of the world. As you cultivate your wealth and power, you can pit those efforts against other players or consolidate them in a guild, allowing you to reach greater heights than you would otherwise be able to on your own. You've got to give props to Sandbox here because there is a great deal of risk in designing an MMO in this way. As a developer, you're banking on suggesting certain behaviors without giving yourself the ability to dictate them. You're hoping that players will interact with one another in a way that stimulates the economy or inspires combat in the open world, but there's no guarantee of that. And yet, Albion Online is brimming with activity. More than any other MMO I've played in my life, this one is overwhelming in its complexity, its systems, and its size. In an industry trending towards heavily curated experiences, Sandbox veered away from the safety of managed design and embraced the chaos of a player-driven world. I think that's pretty cool. Albion Online has one of the most unique communities that I've ever encountered in an MMO. There are a lot of flavors out there, such as the sickly, saccharine sweetness of Final Fantasy XIV, or the brutal honesty of World of Warcraft, or the angry illiteracy of Lost Ark. Albion Online is a little bit more difficult to quantify, but I'll do my best. There's an intensity in this game's community, which is, after some loose speculation, probably the result of how time-intensive and expensive the game can be. With so much of the game being centered around dominating other players, it's clear that Albion Online players are amongst the most ruthless and competitive in the MMO genre. But in my experience, that never manifested as cruelty or gatekeeping. Rather, I had one of the more generous and interesting, we'll say, encounters as I streamed the game on Twitch.
Remember, do you have tier 3 leather armor unlocked? Sorry for interrupting you.
No, I do not have tier 3 leather armor unlocked.
Fuck you. You made me pay my ass off for your shit.
I'm not making you do anything.
I want you to do exactly as I say. Do not do anything.
Okay.
Now put on your fucking armor.
I got hijacked. There is no other way to describe it. A couple of guys hopped into my stream and started telling me what I should or shouldn't be doing. They eventually invited me into their Discord server and kitted me out with better armor and a better weapon. We spent about an hour dueling in the marketplace as they explained the ins and outs of player versus player combat. I've definitely encountered helpful and friendly players in 14 before, but this? I got absolutely kidnapped. They said, do this, don't do that, here's some gear, here's a big sword, have fun. fun. What's interesting is that within 24 hours, at least one of the connections that I made completely fell apart. The guy who bought me all the armor that I'm wearing now and gave me this great sword was banned from the guild that he and his friends were a part of. Then he inexplicably blocked me on Discord. I've got to say, this game's community is intense, and if the encounter that I just described to you is representative of what it's like to become a true blue Albion Online player, then I am in for some Shakespearean drama. Aside from all of that, I deeply appreciate the player interdependency on display in this game. There's an ongoing global chat, which is frankly a must in an MMO, and the people are at times a little unhinged, which I also appreciate. Playing games like Final Fantasy XIV, where the chat box is like a vestigial organ without a function, makes the game feel lonely and lifeless. If your MMO doesn't have an insane global chat feature, then I don't want to play it. That interdependency extends further than just in-game chatter. I didn't realize it at first, but every crafting node in the city that I spent most of my time in was built by a player, I think. Each node has a player name attached to it with its own unique function. You've got weapon vendors, tanners, hunters' lodges, you name it. From what I can tell, this suggests that the in-game infrastructure exists as a result of player expression. That's pretty cool. Can you imagine if the shops in Stormwind were built and operated by guilds? Prices and taxes could be set by the guilds, and then players could decide which shops to go to based on the quality or the cost of the items? That would be amazing. And from what I understand, that is exactly what's happening in Albion Online, which makes the world feel so much more alive than in a theme park MMO. This functionality comes at the cost of more robust gameplay and, of course, visuals, but the trade-off might be worth it to those of you who are looking for a more free-form, player-driven experience. And it must be mentioned that the game houses some of the most colorful locals I've ever encountered in an MMO. There's one big detail that we still have to discuss before we can close out the video. Albion Online is a free-to-play MMORPG, which raises a very important question. How does this game pay the bills? I'd like to preface this section by saying something that I expect to say many times over the course of however long I make content about MMOs on YouTube. This is an expensive hobby. If you aren't paying a cost of admission or an ongoing fee to access the game, it's likely that you're getting a substandard experience unless you decide to fork over the dough to play the game as the developers intended. Albion Online is exactly an example of this. When Sandbox Interactive reached out to sponsor me for a video, they said that they'd give me access to the game's premium tier, but that never ended up happening. And I'm actually glad to be on this side of the garden wall, because this is likely where most of you who decide to give the game a try will be. I feel a lot better knowing what the game looks like from the perspective of someone who is free to play. So with that said, allow me to declare that Albion Online is very expensive. Without access to the premium track, players are missing out on vital features and a more streamlined progression experience. For example, premium players have access to an island, which I assume is for farming and housing. That sounds wonderful, and I would have loved to dedicate a section of this video to that content, but I didn't get to see it. Premium also gives you a steady flow of learning points, which allows you to more quickly master the hundreds of skills and equipment types on the Destiny board. You get more fame for everything you do, you get more focus to preserve gathering materials when you craft, you get more gathering materials, you pay less in taxes on the market board. I mean, the benefits are huge and the price tag is big. Like many subscription-based games, you can receive a discount for buying more than a single month at a time, but I tend to think about my own expenses on a month-to-month basis. From that perspective, Albion Online is the most expensive MMO to offer a subscription on the market, as far as I know. This game charges $15.99 a month to sustain premium access on a 30-day cadence. That is more expensive than World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV. Of course, value is in the eye of the beholder, as the saying sort of goes, but it's a hard sell, isn't it? $16 a month for an isometric game with functional visuals that aren't particularly good to look at, and gameplay that's fun and responsive but simple by virtue of the game's design. Look, only you can decide if that value is worthwhile or not, but the price tag is undeniably high relative to the costs of other MMOs. The Albion store is also rife with sticker shock. There are starter bundles that are priced into the hundreds of dollars. Yeah, they're called starter bundles. So-called value bundles are also quite expensive, and the dozens of optional cosmetics, while stylish, are asking for quite a lot out of your wallet. $30 here, $60 there. Expedition 33 is cheaper than some of these vanity items. Now, I don't mention these things to lambast Sandbox because this game needs to make money, and if the developers can offer digital goods that their players are willing to pay for, then the servers can stay on and the employees at the studio can pay their mortgages and feed their families. The pursuit of profit is not some sin in and of itself, but it's important to understand the economic landscape of a digital ecosystem before you enter it, in my opinion. So I want to give all of you curious onlookers out there a clear picture of what Albion Online could cost if you decide to dive into this world head first. And I have to say, it ain't cheap.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Alright guys, some final thoughts before we close the video out. My time with Albion Online has been extremely interesting and textured, we'll say the least, especially following some strange interactions with the community. I was completely incorrect about what this MMO was as I stepped into its world. And while I was a little disappointed to realize that the driving force behind the game is player versus player combat, I did end up enjoying the feeling of finding your own destiny in a sandbox environment. I've played games like World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV for years, which heavily colored my idea of what an MMO is. Those games are highly directed and allow for little to no individual choice. You're often engaging in a system that was designed with a highly specific intention, and as long as you play within the acceptable parameters, then the game will reward you. An aversion to failure or loss has made modern MMOs feel safe. Like all the sharp edges have been sanded down and any rough textures have been smoothed over. Now, I'm not saying that I want full loop PvP in Final Fantasy XIV, but I am glad to know that there is a vibrant, healthy MMORPG that offers an experience that completely rejects the design philosophy that has dictated MMO design for the last 20 years. Albion Online is far from perfect. It isn't a looker, of course, and the gameplay, while snappy and responsive, has the depth of a puddle. Not to mention, if you're not willing to pay for premium, you'll exist at a significant disadvantage to anyone who is willing to fork over $16 a month to enjoy the things that money can buy in Albion Online. Still, there's a worthwhile experience to be had here and a colorful community to share it with. I'm obviously very thankful to Sandbox Interactive for inviting me to take on this journey, but I'm not interested in backing out now that the video's done. I'm still personally curious to see what more Albion Online has to offer, particularly as the game approaches its 10-year anniversary in the coming years. There's a lot of room in this game for any of you out there who might find some joy in putting copper and tin together to make bronze, so hop in. You might find just what you're looking for. If you're interested in playing Albion Online, then I invite you to use my referral link in the description. Don't worry, it's not a commission thing. I'm not even sure that I get any benefit if you use it, but it's there for you if you want it. Thanks again to Sandbox Interactive for sponsoring this video. A humongous shout out to my sponsors on Patreon, JG Chowder and Lammy. Remember that you can get all videos 2 days early and ad-free for only $1 a month on Patreon and YouTube memberships. It's the best deal in town. If you enjoyed the video and you want to see more MMO content, make sure to like and subscribe before you go. It helps the channel reach new people. Follow me on Twitter or Twitch. Tags are on screen, relevant links in the description. And minding my manners, of course, thanks for watching.